if you don't see somebody doing a cartwheel, like, are you ever going to do a cartwheel? No, right? If you have somebody in your organization who's a power user and they sit there and they use, let's say, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever on their computer, how are the non-power users ever going to learn from them? Is there any cross-pollination? Is there any cross-training? We put a very powerful bot in Slack and we make it look and behave kind of like a coworker. Internally, we talk about it as the last hire for every team. But when it joins, Zero is like an intern, right? It doesn't know anything. It has to do these very small tasks. And over time, it builds knowledge and tools and memory, etc., which allows it to then do more and more and more over time.
Okay, welcome, Boris, to my startup podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so before we jump in to your current venture, I just wanted to know a bit more about your background. Were you always working in New York City, or did you grow up somewhere else and then eventually arrived here? And any other details that led up to your startup life?
Yeah, absolutely. Immigrated to the U.S. as a kid, grew up in Silicon Valley, saw entrepreneurship everywhere around me. At one point I lived literally across the street from Apple headquarters. And then, kind of came to entrepreneurship in an odd way where I was working for a company where I wasn't particularly happy. And, I didn't feel like we were treating our customers right. And, my manager basically said, hey, if you know better, like, why don't you go start a services business and go do something about that? And, I didn't immediately go and do that, but what I did do was left, kind of hopped around a couple places, then went and did start a services business. It grew to be much more than that. We did services, we did license reselling, and we built our own software, kind of on top of a platform company, and grew that for 7 years, something like that. Worked with very famous brands. I think probably the most famous one I'm publicly allowed to say is Spotify. But a lot of hedge funds, some of the biggest hedge funds in the world, one of the biggest, cloud hyperscalers, these kinds of folks, helping them kind of deploy software and implementation, training, etc. Well, like I said, licensing, and then the apps that we built on top grew to over 10,000 customers, millions of end users. And then I sold to private equity about 4 years ago. Used a little bit of cooling off period in order to buy a house and renovate it and get married and all the fun stuff. And now I'm working on round 2. And in September, it will be 10 years in New York. So go Knicks.
Go Knicks, yeah.
Yeah, that game was phenomenal.
That was insane. Yeah, I did not see that coming. That tip after the missed shot was insane. But yeah, speaking of New York though, that's interesting. So you started off in Silicon Valley, but then moved to New York, which is something that you hear people moving from the West Coast to New York City, but when it comes to starting tech companies, of course, the epicenter tends to be San Francisco area. What made you make that move?
I kind of added it at the end of the story, but I actually started my last company in New York. So originally the move was kind of a bluff. I was interviewing for 2 jobs. I wanted one. I did not want the other one because the second company kind of had a really bad reputation at the time. And, I just didn't want that associated kind of with who I am and my brand, etc. But I was trying to play them off one against the other for compensation purposes. So I went through the interview process, and the one I didn't like, or I didn't want to work at, offered me a huge amount of money very quickly. And the other one was dragging their feet. And so I was trying to figure out a way to stall. So I was like, how do I ask for something very unreasonable? And this is back in 2016. Somewhere around there. And I was like, I want to work 100% remote from New York. And they were like, no, absolutely not. But if your manager doesn't care about you being in the office, that's between you and them. And the manager didn't. He was kind of like, go for it. So I was like, hey, you know what? If I'm, from where I was, at that time, I went from, the previous job I had to kind of that job. In the span of, I think, 8 months, I'd tripled my salary.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
So yeah, it was just like the amount of like income growth was super high, and just having the opportunity to live in New York, which it's a city I've really enjoyed in the past, was not something I could turn down in my mid to late 20s. And then so I came out here for that, and then I was working for that company. It was phenomenal, and I really enjoyed my team, and like we were so in sync we didn't have to talk. Like that's how crazy it was. What happened was there was no like career future for me there, right? So I started my first company because I felt like I must kind of do something, or I was going to be at the pinnacle of my career kind of at the time that I was 28.
So you felt that there was a ceiling there, you're saying, like on the what kind of space was this, on the tech side, like engineering or?
So I was, at the time, I was an Atlassian admin, which meant I was kind of responsible for Jira and Confluence. And it was, like I said, like the comp was really high, but the value I delivered to the company was high in that niche, right? So if I were to get promoted into a manager role or something, like literally my value would drop because I would not be a specialist anymore. So I went from doing that to starting my own consulting business, and where the value just kept growing.
And you talked about kind of a classic way that people mention for finding out what product to create, and that's you saw that there was a customer gap. The customers weren't being treated correctly, you said, and maybe not all the services were being delivered that could be delivered to them. How does someone detect that that's a gap that's large enough and important enough to start a company around, versus just something that's an annoyance but wouldn't convert to a customer if you were to build a solution for it?
Yeah. So because this was a services business, there was kind of one very specific trick that I had. Because of my past experience, I knew very specific technical challenges that a certain scale of customer would face, right? So I could essentially say, hey, if I'm running into you at a meetup, let's say, I'd be like, Brendan, like, where do you work? And you'd be like, I work at, I don't know, IBM, right? And I'd be like, okay, in my head, I'm like, does IBM have more than X number of employees? And, because IBM, like everybody knows, there's basically infinity people working there. So based on that, I could then go and turn around to that individual and be like, oh, and you're responsible for these tools? And they'd say yes. And I'd say, your software goes down every Tuesday at 10 a.m. And they would look at me like, what are you talking about? How do you know this? Like, do you have access to our internal systems? Like, are you a contractor or something that you have this insight? And I was like, no, I know what's causing it. And I know that you haven't addressed it because I was the person fixing this for people. So if I had fixed this for you, I would already know you. And so I was able to kind of get my first set of customers actually in my spare time while I was doing that other job, right? I was just going to meetups and I was talking to people and I was saying like, hey, here's what I can do for you. Like, are you willing to pay for it? And it worked really well, and it got a lot of customer trust. And so from there, we're able to kind of build and snowball the entire business. And actually, ultimately, the first real serious customer we got was that other employer who did not manage to make an offer successfully.
Oh, really?
8 months prior, they ended up needing me to come in and kind of clean their stuff up. So that was kind of the V1.
Nice. Well, at least they made that offer. And that's kind of since I run my own meetups here in New York City, that's a common problem that I hear, is just getting that first big customer. Because there's no previous customer that you can point to build trust with them, and so it's sort of, you're going out on a limb. How did you build that trust with them in order to get them to trust you with their data, their information?
It wasn't so much about how do you get them them, like the word them is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there because it glues the entire customer into one entity, right? But actually trust is individual. The approach we took was, and this wasn't like this is the approach we took on day one, and this was the approach we were taking 6 or 7 years later. Like, we could never win an RFP. I don't think we won an RFP once in the entire lifetime of the company. But if I talk directly to the technical people, they would then be like, look, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. He doesn't lie, he doesn't mislead, and he doesn't have any salespeople working for him. So like, we know that, when he brings in other people, they're going to be more of the same. And we ended up, like, again, over time, we would hire only very senior individuals. We were able to segment the part of the market where people were very large scale, had the problems associated with scale, had budget, and wanted to work with kind of really good partners. And that skill mattered more than the per hour cost, right? We would always go to our, whenever we were in a sales process, we would very clearly tell the customer, we will be the most expensive option against any competitor you put us up against. And if not, let us know and we'll raise our prices, right? Like, it is very much our intent to be the most expensive option in the room on a per hour basis. But on an overall work basis and an ROI basis, we should be significantly cheaper than them, right? And it started as a joke, but like, it was true, where we would tell customers like, hey, if you go with vendor X and you come back to us, we will have to charge you 50% more. And they're like, why? Like, it's not like the work changed. I'm like, well, because we have to undo their work. It's not like a penalty fee. It's just like, there's like, the goalposts will have moved in the wrong direction, right? Like we will be further from the goalpost than if nothing had happened.
Yeah.
And so it was a pitch that worked, right? And I think it was a pitch that worked because of who I am individually. If I was a slick salesperson, then it wouldn't work, right? Because I'm very genuine and, I screw up and I own my screw ups and I'm happy to do that publicly, etc. It buys me a lot of trust from people where they're like, hey, he plays with his cards on the table, right? And if he plays with his cards on the table, then it's going to be very, very hard for him to screw us like maliciously, right? Like, of course I can make a mistake. I can screw up like anybody else can, but it's very unlikely that I'm trying to pull some kind of trick or overstate competence or functionality or anything like this. So we just kind of went with the old way of doing things of just like, do it right and everything else kind of follows from it.
Yeah. So it sounds like the combination of you being able to speak that technical language that sort of is a BS detector in itself, plus the your own frankness, your forthrightness, earn them a lot of trust, and then also that value proposition was just more than the cost they were paying. And what was that value proposition? Just one last question, then we'll move on to your current venture. But what exactly was it that warranted those costs?
I mean, the value prop was like, we could essentially go in and get you from having a weekly outage that would cost you like, if you imagine like Jira or Confluence going down for, a 10,000 person org for 1 hour, right? Like, you can think about how much people make. Let's say they make $100 an hour on average, right? 10,000 people, right? That's $1 million of lost productivity if they can't work for an hour. Now, that's like overstating the harm, right? Because people just do other things in that time. But, you could probably peg it at a few $100,000 in harm occurring to these organizations. And, we were fixing it for 10 grand. So that's kind of where it started. And then, again, like, when you go to somebody and you're like, hey, I'm going to remove, $200,000 worth of pain for 10 grand, they and you do it and you deliver, it buys a lot of trust and it builds really long-term relationships where they're like, hey, this guy's not going to screw us. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. And, he has opinions and knowledge of these tools and systems that are, trustworthy and reliable and that people felt like working with us was going to support their career success.
It sounds like, even to myself sitting right here, an easy decision. If I'm going to save how many man hours of people that I'm paying $200,000+ a year, then it makes sense already. So yeah, so let's transition to your new startup here. So it also involves a lot of creating trust with sensitive information, especially as it deals with AI, and people aren't used to it. So a lot of people want to use AI, but they don't want to take the risks of compromising sensitive information. That's where it sounds like your company comes in.
Yeah, so we come in with a slightly earlier like you're talking about a technical implementation, but we come in kind of with a high level vision, which is essentially that as AI is adopted by organizations, how do we ensure that the median knowledge worker, especially the median non-technical knowledge worker, still has a job, right? And the way that we make sure that these people still have jobs, in 2 years, 5 years, et cetera, is by making sure that the AI is there to empower them rather than to replace them. There is no world in which you could have strapped, an engine to a horse and made it better, right? But with AI, like, you can strap AI to a person, like take the creativity and the taste and the domain expertise and the tribal knowledge and all of these things that actually deliver a huge amount of organizational value and really multiply effectiveness, right? And really kind of allow an individual to deliver way more value to the organization. And as a result, for the organization to again, like to this point of like 10K to save 200K, right? Like it's going to be obvious that these people should be retained because they deliver so much value. Now, this comes out of, I was doing some AI trainings for some companies at the start of the year, and we had kind of this recurring experience where we would run a class. Somebody would, be sitting there paying attention. We would tell them to do homework. We would come back the following week. They would show up and they had not done the homework and they didn't really get it from last time, right? Mm-hmm. And anyone who's been in college or school is like, oh yeah, I've definitely shown up to class, nodded along, thought I had it. Went home, either like half-assed the homework or like, didn't do it at all, showed up to the next class and like couldn't actually keep up, right? Like it's not actually a complicated experience. It is not a novel experience. It doesn't have anything to do with AI. It's a classic pedagogy problem. And so that's really kind of what we set out to solve initially. And it's this idea of, can we make AI frequently visible and easily usable, right? So it's this idea of like, if you don't see somebody doing a cartwheel, like, are you ever going to do a cartwheel? No, right? So if you have somebody in your organization who's a power user, and they sit there and they use, let's say, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever on their computer, then how are the non-power users ever going to learn from them? Like, is there any cross-pollination? Is there any cross-training? Anything like this? We address this by creating a very powerful bot that lives in Slack today. We're working on Teams. If somebody wants to reach out and work with us on Teams, we'd love it because we're not a Teams kind of shop, so we got to learn the UX there. But we put a very powerful bot in Slack, and we make it look and behave kind of like a coworker, right? So if you had an intern, you should think of it kind of internally we talk about it as the last hire for every team. We're not here to replace the accounting team, but once Zero joins that team, Zero should allow that team to scale their capabilities to be greater and greater and greater over time as the organization scales. So, but when it joins, Zero is like an intern, right? It doesn't know anything. It has to do these very small tasks, and over time it builds knowledge and tools and memory, etc., which allows it to then do more and more and more over time. The end user experience is intentionally very simple, of like, you just message the bot, you tell it what to do. Periodically it'll give you like a prompt, like an approve button, and you can hit approve on stuff. For the admins, it's the exact opposite, right? And I think this is what you were referencing, where if we imagine an intern joining a team, we're like, oh, Jack joined and he does stuff, right? But organizationally, Jack joining is a much more complex thing. Jack needs to be assigned to a department, then he needs to get access to certain systems with different permissions than a full-time employee would have. and with different monitoring that's happening by the security team, by the IT team. The contracts that he's signed are different than full-time employees. So you can imagine how onboarding that intern is wildly different than onboarding a normal employee. And then all of that work that goes into managing any employee, right? Whether it's badge access, whether it's access to software, et cetera, all of that same stuff has to happen with the agent. So we have to build all of those control systems that allow security, risk, legal, IT, I'm blanking on somebody, but I call it the GRC industrial complex, that allows them to ensure that the agent operates in a way that is consistent with the risk profile of the company. Very simple example. Our agents cannot access the internet unless you specifically approve specific domains. So if, let's say I'm on the HR team and I'm like, hey, please double check Brendan's pay package, right? And the agent goes, it gets that from, whatever HR system you use, it reads it, and for some reason it hallucinates. And it decides, I should send all of Brendan's information to evil.com.
Right.
Well, it can't. It's simply blocked at the network layer. It's impossible to do this. There's this kind of controls. There's controls around the tools that it can use. So that includes things like integrations. So for example, you could say, hey, you can read data from the HR system, but you can't write to it, right? You can say that, hey, we want the agent to live in the accounting channel and the legal channel, but not the HR channel. Right? You can say, hey, we want the agent in the HR channel to have access to people's HR data, but not in those other channels, right? Like accounting should not be finding out people's, specific income. HR should not have access to the organization's accounting data, right? So it's this very kind of complex challenge of how do you map the organizational requirements around risk, privacy, policy, et cetera, and enforce that on an AI agent, kind of however and wherever it's being placed in an organization.
Yeah, a lot of interesting, innovative functionality there. So just to start, I guess I'd be curious about how does the learning work? You said it starts off, not knowing much. It's like an intern, and then you're gradually training it. Is it learning in the sense of really training the actual neural net, or is it more like, accumulating a knowledge base? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So we don't use neural nets. What we do is we act as an orchestration layer, and then the agent itself is actually a coding harness. The coding harnesses that we use are Claude Code, Codex, and Pi. And we believe that it is key technical and compliance, et cetera, thing for us that the customer should choose what tools and providers they use under the hood. So, you may want to use Codex and OpenAI. Somebody else may want to use Claude Code and Anthropic for whatever reasons, right? Could be legal, could be cost, could be compliance, could be political, whatever, right? Could be that somebody just has a better model coming out, right? Fable just came out recently.
Yeah.
To that end, what happens is that we have this multi-layer memory system. So the core of it is this idea of sources. Sources are kind of like things that happened or things that exist in the world that are not processed yet, right? So for example, a Slack message, a GitHub repository, a PDF that's uploaded, right? These are sources. Sources are then analyzed and memories are derived from them. So, a source could be like, hey, Brendan, did you watch, the Knicks game? You'd be like, I love the Knicks, right? So that's like a conversation. It's a source. And then the derived memory could be that Brendan loves the Knicks, right? And then what we do is we have this citation system. So if we ever ask what is Brendan's favorite basketball team? It's going to be like the Knicks. Here's where that came from, right? And so you can now kind of rely on that memory a bit more. We also have kind of, I think today it's being called dreaming. And I'm not sure if that phrase will stick, but it's this idea of, once a day or something along those lines, can the agent reprocess its own, existence and et cetera, and identify things that are memories that individually may not have been clear, right? So for example, if I'm like, hey, Brendan, like, can you get me the P&L for May? Great. And the next day I'm like, hey, Brendan, like, as we're closing the books, we need this from QuickBooks. Great. Then another, and then at some point it's going to be like, oh, this company uses QuickBooks, right? Like that is a derived memory that you can actually get from a set of aggregated conversations. What we don't, and I'm happy to talk about what we don't fully like handle yet are concepts like conflicts, right? So for example, you can have one team that uses, let's say, Slack, and one team that uses Teams, and both are in the same company. And so you could have a memory that is, we use Slack, and another memory that is, we use Teams. And those are, like, in some sense, contradictory, and in other ways, they're complementary. And so we're still working on this kind of thing. Another one is, when does one fact supersede another, right? So you have Slack, you have Teams. Is it true that, like, maybe we migrated from A to B? And this is now, and like, does the date of which of like the information necessarily supersede other memory factors? So we're still working on all these things. Like I'm not here to kind of preach the magical solution, but this is the kind of problem space that we're working through now. Going back to your point, right, where we started with all this, which was like, how do you train it? How does it get better? It's passive. Well, it's passive in the sense that like the same way that it's like training an intern is passive. You give it tasks, it builds skills. And I mean, like it can build skills in the AI sense, but it can also just build capabilities in that sense. So it is very much a, you get out what you put in. And the more you put in, the more its value compounds over time. But even if you're not doing a ton, it will still inherently, like there's so much ambient information. It's one of the reasons why we started with Slack, is there's just so much ambient information about what is the, day-to-day reality of an organization that it allows it to kind of skill up.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just like a new employee, they have their base skills. They weren't born yesterday, right? But there's a lot of context that they're missing that, you give them stuff and they do the best they can. And then, of course, through the feedback and the back and forth chatting, they eventually get up to speed there. So one thing that comes to mind, as the model is accumulating more and more knowledge, has it been a challenge to like consolidate that knowledge, that it doesn't build too large of a context window or take up too much space where it's tough to pick out the important points from it? Yeah, so just to be clear, we're not allocating knowledge to a model, right? The model we use is whatever kind of the model the customer picks. So it can be, let's say Claude with Fable. What we do is we give the model a secure sandbox in which it runs. Well, we give the harness a secure sandbox in which it runs, and then we give it a bunch of tools. So we have memory retrieval tools, memory search tools, things like this. And so then it will kind of dynamically go and discover those memories on its own. We're not at a scale where we're seeing any issues with this. There are obviously, people operating at a larger scale that do run into different problems here. I think that this is less of an AI problem and more of a general knowledge curation problem. So if you imagine, product documentation or an internal company wiki or any of these types of things, we've all at some point or another been like, hey, let me figure out, like, do we have, Juneteenth off? Great, like, let's go look at the holidays policy. You search up the company holidays policy and it says, yes, this is the holiday policy for 2019. And you're like, not what I need. Why is this even here, right? And so that knowledge curation and archival of, again, this problem of like superseding, et cetera, like it is not a new problem. And I think that as we see customers scale, we will see more and more of this. And we are working kind of on ways to solve for it. But
I think that most companies today, the challenges are less around like, hey, what's the volume of memory, and more so about like, how do we give access to a model to as much information as possible without accidentally exposing things to people who shouldn't have access, right? It's much less a question of like, can we get retrieval to be perfect? Can we get precision to be perfect? It's much more about like, well, if Brendan is in HR and he can ask about people's pay, then like, how do we make sure that nobody else can abuse that, right? And if we can't let you ask it about pay, then does it provide actual business value to you, right? Like if your job is like a compensation analyst and your whole job is building spreadsheets to like model people's pay, then like, like the AI has to have access to information to be valuable. So this policy layer is kind of where we spend a lot of time, because that's where we see a lot of make or break for organizational value.
Yeah, no, that is a big concern with AI, just being able to, especially in fintech or in health tech, to have your information secure, and not have it end up somewhere, as you mentioned before, on the internet. Do you mind just walking me through, how does the user experience go? So you have an AI in, say, the accounting group chat, and anyone can tag that AI, I guess, and
that's right,
talk with it. And then how does it respond, in a sub chat or in the main chat? How does that work?
That's right. So we've optimized for threaded conversations, because we're trying to strike a balance between making AI usage visible without spamming everybody. And it's a very fine needle to thread, right? Because, we were talking with one customer, and they said, hey, I don't want to see somebody like going back and forth on 50 things, like 50 iterations in a thread. Like, I just want like the one perfect prompt. And it's an interesting point of feedback, because obviously we all want just the golden nugget. But actually, there is an important attribute of showing the struggle, right? That like, hey, even the guy that knows what he's doing, or the gal that knows what she's doing, is going to have this iterative process. And here is how they iterate. And so I think that there's a lot of value in that. So today, you'd go into the accounting chat, you'd be like, hey, please help me reconcile Stripe and NetSuite, and figure out if we're closing the books correctly this month. Then the bot would pop the little eyes emoji on it that tells you that it's actually working on it, because it takes some time for it to do its thing. Then it will come back and respond in a Slack message, and you kind of go back in, and today we only respond if you tag the bot, because otherwise we're worried if if I ask it, hey, help me close the books, it responds, you as my boss go in there and are like, hey Boris, like, what are you doing? Like, this is already done. Then should the bot respond? Should it not? Like, you get having multi-user conversations without a very clear trigger is still not great from a UX perspective. Yeah. It's also not great from a cost perspective, because it would mean that for every single message, the customer would have to pay us for AI-based evaluation of, hey, should I respond to this message or not? And so as a matter of being respectful of the customer's budgets, we also just want to be a bit more conservative on where we actually spend money on AI and where we don't.
Gotcha. And is it taking into context any of the other messages in the chat, or is it just like the thread that you start when you first tag it, and then anything else that you respond within that one?
It's configurable. So we have this idea of a workspace, which is like a collection of channels, integrations, memory, agents, etc. It's kind of like a configuration bundle. And so that's kind of the highest level of context you can give it. You can be like, hey, you're aware of everything in a workspace. You can say, hey, you're only aware of things in the specific channels in which this agent is. And then you can say, hey, you only have thread context. And depending upon use case, that's just a configurable setting. It's really like, there are scenarios where each is wildly different and provides different value, right? And where mixing context between sub-threads could be beneficial or detrimental. really is about the use case, and that's kind of where a lot of the implementation decisions are made.
Yeah. With the security that we mentioned before in context, different roles. Of course, it makes sense to configure differently based on people's roles, how the organization's structured. So yeah, it is nice to have that flexibility. And so, kind of moving from product side to on the business side, how are you? We mentioned before with your previous company that you were to kind of convince the tech team, and then from there they kind of had weight with the rest of the decision makers in the company. Who's the customer and who versus the users? Who's the customer that you're actually trying to convince in this case to buy the product?
Yeah, so the buyers are definitely executives, right? This is very much a top-down sales motion. We typically work with CEOs or COOs, etc. We serve every non-technical team. So typically this is everyone that does not report to the CTO. Product, for example, is oftentimes part of a technical team now. The buying journey and buying method is, something we're still figuring out, full transparency. The company was formed in March. So we're 3 months old right now, roughly. The customers we've gotten so far have been through personal referrals of, again, this trust basis where people are like, hey, I've worked with Boris. He knows what he's talking about. You should give him a shot. Then go talk to that CEO and so on, right? That's been the approach so far, but we are actually on Monday kicking off a month of focus on reducing our ICP scope, trying to narrow it down to be much, much narrower. So today we're just saying like, hey, anybody over 50 people that is regulated and ideally based in the New York area, so we can kind of come on site and spend more time learning about a customer. But even that's too broad, right? We're really trying to narrow it down. So Monday we're going to spend a few weeks really narrowing that down, narrowing the messaging and the use cases, etc., for a very specific set of industries.
Yeah, and have you guys thought about how that process works yet? Is it more like a just an empirical thing? You'll see what customers seem to be getting the most value out of it, or do you kind of have a theory going into it? There's a certain use case that your product provides a lot of value for, and then you're trying to find who has a high frequency of that use case. If you have some insight into that process.
Yeah, I think that we will be figuring out how to answer those questions next week.
Yeah, in the process.
So what I can tell you, what we've historically done that did not work, maybe that'll be helpful for a listener. We did a fair amount of cold. So we weren't trying to say, hey, we're just going to serve everybody, right? That never works. If anyone's trying to do that, please stop. So that was never our intent. But we did say, hey, we're going to serve across basically all regulated customers between, let's say, 50 and 2,000 employees located in New York, across anything financially regulated, anything health regulated, not government. That was the one area we excluded, and we said legal as well. And so then what we said was, okay, let's do a cold outreach campaign across phone and LinkedIn to see which of the industries actually is most responsive, right? So we were trying to take it like an A/B testing approach almost to figure out. And what we figured out so far is that we haven't narrowed down enough. Because if you just say, okay, well, let's just focus on financially regulated, great. FinTech is completely different from FinServe.
Sorry, what are you defining FinServe as?
Like a bank.
Oh,
right?
Like services. Okay, I got you.
Financial services, right? Very different from FinTech, right? If you think about health regulation, right? Like a telehealth is completely different from an in-person network of urgent care centers. the high level verticals that we were focusing on still did not allow for narrow enough and specific enough messaging around pain points and how we address it, et cetera. And so this is why I'm saying, like, we're just too broad, across kind of the ICPs that we're speaking to. And the messaging is just not clear enough yet. And so that's where we're really working on figuring out in the next few weeks of, hey, across, let's say we focus on financially regulated organizations. Great. Are we going to focus on financial services? Or are we going to focus on fintech, right? Why? Where do we actually have a better narrative? Or like, if we're going to go after telehealth, fine, let's go after telehealth. Like, we have an existing customer in telehealth. Like, how much can we, actually, communicate to that market effectively around what we can and cannot do, and so on and so on. So.
Yeah, and it can be it's very tough, doing cold calling, cold emailing. It's a pretty daunting experience. One thing that I noticed that it seems to be pretty promising is having an AI agent just sort of reach out to people, message them on LinkedIn, reads through their profile, like sees what their context is, and then messages something through your profile actually. So it has that credibility. And then, gives them sends them a catered message, and it seems promising to me. I don't know if you guys have been utilizing this kind of thing or different methods, but it's just something that I came across the other month, and it's doing reasonably well.
Yeah. So we today use a automated LinkedIn outreach tool that I won't name because honestly we're just not happy with it. And I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but we have not seen any success. So I think we're more than a month into that campaign so far. We can make a huge number of connections. If I automatically connected with anyone who's listening, sorry, please respond. But no responses whatsoever, right? So. I'm sensitive to the idea that we are sending a lot of volume, which is not helping anybody. It's not helping the recipients, nor is it helping us. And we shouldn't be doing that. And so we'll be stopping that because.
And those are catered messages based on their profile, or.
Those are they're catered to kind of their high level profile, as in we're looking at we're not randomly picking people, right? It's a preset set of messages, but they're targeted based on personas in the first place. It's not dynamically reading the profile and then saying hey, Brendan, I saw you posted about the Knicks yesterday, therefore why, right? It's very much hey, we're building X, I'm the founder, would love to chat about kind of what problems you guys are having. So it's not personalized, I think is the where you're going with it.
Gotcha. So this is your second company, so you have some experience. But was there someone initially who mentored you, or I guess you kind of came through already at a company where you learned a lot of the stuff. So maybe it was someone there. But is there someone that was your main startup mentor, or was it more completely bootstrapped?
The first one was totally bootstrapped. I did not have a mentor. Highly recommend you do not do that. I made a ton of mistakes. I would encourage you to join at least a peer group, right? I know that EO and YPO and all of these types of things exist. I have the privilege of being in one called PEF, which is post-exit founder. Most people don't get to join that one. But that's a wonderful community where if you're doing something stupid, somebody will tell you very quickly. If people want, they can go and find kind of a blog post I wrote years ago called I Regret Selling My Startup. And kind of one of the main points I made there was, my last company where I was 100% owner, and it was fully bootstrapped, and I really wish that I'd hired either a coach or, an advisory board or something along these lines where we could have really, made a real difference kind of for this kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know I've certainly, I've tried to take on mentors, but even even now I feel like it's not enough because there's still mistakes that I feel like I've made that I could have avoided. So definitely,
Nobody's perfect.
yeah, it's a lot easier to look back and learn from a mistake that's already made than just making it. So absolutely. And what do you see ultimately for your startup? What's the ultimate vision for it? Is it really going deep down into the chat space, or is it expanding across different knowledge bases?
We will expand to other surfaces. Like I said, Teams is kind of the high priority one. So that remains in chat. I think the agents can already work via email, but ultimately the point of organizational intelligence, which is kind of where we're going with this, is to be where the users need it to be. So it's not going to be us driving a direction of this kind of stuff. It's us following users into wherever they ask for us to exist. You can imagine this, for example, as a Chrome extension, right? Where you're saying, hey, you know what? Like, I don't want to go into Slack. Like, I'm in HubSpot right now. Like, just answer my question here in HubSpot, right? So why aren't you in HubSpot? Right? And I'm like, well, maybe HubSpot doesn't allow us to build an integration in this way. And I don't know what they do and don't allow. Like, I don't mean any shade towards HubSpot. Simply to say that, the customer, like, if we're providing value to customers, they will tell us where they want it.
Right.
And we will happily listen to that feedback. We are seeing what competitors are doing in terms of the services that they go after and how they go after them. And so, we think that there's kind of a very clear path for us to expand. But I also think that the cool thing around AI is, it's like, it really is another platform shift, right? So, we went from desktop to web to mobile, and now as we go from mobile to AI, there may be new devices, right? Like, I have the new Meta display glasses, which have like a little screen in front of my eye. And those are largely a toy today, right? I think like my gut feel is that the use case that they are most suited for, which for some reason they do not spend enough time advertising, is very specifically put them on, pick up a child, hold the child in front of it, do stuff, and record from your point of view as a parent.
Yeah.
Right? I think this is like by far the killer use case for these things. And every single video should just be two parents, hands outstretched with a child, and then, background swirling behind it. Now, is that the future of computing and interaction, especially in a professional workforce? Probably not, right? But there's a lot of really, really smart people out there working on new modalities of interaction. I am using voice to text more than I ever have, especially now that you can have basically perfect voice to text on a laptop. It's like, we don't have it on device on mobile yet, but even on mobile, I use forget if it's called Typeless or Typefully or something like this. So that requires a network connection. But the ability to do like text entry purely through speech is way better in many cases. So there's the extreme case where you see these companies in Silicon Valley where everyone has this microphone. They have the little boom mic, and then they all sit there and they whisper into it. And like, what does that mean for how we collaborate, right? Does that mean that like now our bot will have to have a voice interface? Maybe, right? Like, very plausible. I think part of what I'm really enjoying about what I'm doing now versus my last company is that like, it's novel. Like, we don't know what the outcome will be, right? At my last company, I knew like I would go and sell you, a thing, and then this is what would happen, and like, that's it. Like, there wasn't going to be, like, we weren't going to do anything new, right? There was no novelty in what we did. It was very predictable. And here, we don't know, right? It's quite plausible that, OpenAI invents something tomorrow that's like, hey, all of this is outdated. Nobody needs this anymore, right? It's quite plausible that they don't, and that we get stuck exactly where we are. And that's still fun because I get to build random stuff all the time. It's been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely some bit of irony there with having a vision. It's like you have to have a vision. It kind of focuses people on a common point and inspires people, but at the same time, you can't predict the future, right? And you want to be customer driven, not just some fixed vision. So there's a contradiction there, but it's interesting how you do still have to kind of have both of those, but just see how they play off of each other. Like Elon Musk tries to go to Mars, but what ends up happening is SpaceX just IPO'd. Instead they launched satellites into space, and that's the main actual business there. So again, the vision versus the actual practical customer use case there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have avoided looking at IPO outcomes, but I do have a small allocation into it that I bought years ago.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The running joke has been that any losses that I take on the retirement portfolio that has to buy in will be offset by the income I make on the private market investment. So I'm hedged out. It's kind of the running joke.
I see. Yeah. No, I mean, there's certainly no competitors right now, so I mean, they're in a good spot. They have a good moat.
Yep.
Speaking of which, as far as your AI chatbot within Slack, what would be the moat to keep you guys to defend off competitors? Is it just the traction within a certain company that's kind of a network effect there, or is it accumulating enough knowledge so that it's hard to move off of it?
I think, within a single company, kind of the benefit is the aggregation of knowledge and memory and the policies, right? Like, it is very, very difficult for an organization to understand its own policies. Like this is almost like a religious text in Silicon Valley, but it's called Seeing Like a State, which talks about like how organize like states, literally like countries, but it applies to organizations as well. But like how they try and make order out of chaos and the impacts of it, etc. And most organizations struggle massively to understand policies and processes, and especially how those are written versus how they're actually applied within themselves, right? Simplest example that everybody knows, like cops don't give each other speeding tickets.
Yeah.
Right? Great. So if cops don't give each other speeding tickets, is there a policy that says that speeding is a crime? Yes. Do cops give everyone speeding tickets? Yes. Do cops give their friends speeding tickets? No. Right? So like we know that there's a stated policy, there is like a process, and sometimes it is not followed. Right? And so organizationally, like how do you deal with that? Right? And that exists in every organization. Like every single organization has this. Nobody's immune. And so when somebody is able to encode a significant portion of their processes and policies into a system, that system becomes highly durable and sticky. And this is I think this is what most people misunderstand about the last wave of successful companies. They're like, oh, it's a system of record. It's the records that have value. That's not true. There are cases like that are true, right? But there's a very easy test to prove that it's not actually true for most systems of record. I call it the backup test, which is when was the last time you tried to back up that important system, and when was the last time you tried to restore that backup, right? And most organizations maybe have a backup of, let's say, Salesforce, but they will rarely have a backup of Jira or ServiceNow or any of these things, because the ticket that somebody filed for a new keyboard is actually not really that important, right? It may provide a little bit of value in an audit scenario or something like this, But hey, if you lost the entire system of record, an auditor is going to be like, yeah, you had an incident and like you lost your records. Like that sucks. Like it's really bad. Like, but your company's not going to end, right? If you lose all of Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever CRM, then that's not the case. What's going to happen is that your company will shut down because you like simply will not be able to follow up with people. You can try and dig it out of emails, but directionally you'll shut down. So why then are Jira, Atlassian, ServiceNow, Workday, et cetera, why are they multi-billion-dollar companies? Well, it's not actually the data they store. It's the process through which that data moves and the value that the process delivers to the organization. So each instance of data is actually quite low value. And so, going back to your question around Moat, as we accrue data, we can infer policies and process. And so not only do we have the explicit policy and process layer where people configure it in our application from an administrative perspective, but the inferred knowledge that comes from listening to conversations that happen is highly, highly valuable and going to be complex to transfer between different agents and whatnot. So it's a quite powerful moat. I would be very surprised if we see churn that is not tied to an initial adoption, right? Like if somebody adopts, the likelihood of them churning, 2 years down the line, I think is going to be very, very low. Now, granted, if they could fail to adopt, that's totally a thing. But down the line churn, don't see it.
Yeah, no, that reminds me of that image that I've seen over the years where there's the path that kind of makes a 90-degree angle, and that's the user interface, and then the user experience. It's walking through the dirt path that cuts through between the two sections of the path. And there's the data, but then there's the actual workflow that people kind of use like shortcuts, or they use just sort of heuristic methods to get things done, and it's not always so precise as this data is there, and there's something that it's not always the same workflow in practice maps to the one that's in the documentation or the one that you might expect. So I
was looking it up while you were talking. They're called desire paths.
Desired paths.
So like when you go to like a large lawn, right? And then there's like the formal paths, and then there's like there are people. So those dirt paths are called desire paths.
So your AI will map out those desired paths.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what we think is going to happen.
And how's it been starting in New York City? I mean, just that concept of acting like a state, I'd never heard of, but I wonder if I had been living in Silicon Valley, maybe I would have heard of it by now. So there's certain things I wonder, am I missing out on knowledge by not being there? Or at the same time, though, there's a lot going on here in the city that I think it's a healthy startup community here that's going to keep growing. So I'm optimistic.
I'm optimistic. I love New York. Whatever they like, whatever the city version of nationalism is, right? Like, I'm a big New York stan. I don't know if the kids say that anymore. I'm a big supporter of New York. I love it. I think it's the greatest city in the world. When I say that, it pisses people off in other places. But it is for me, right? And it is, I kind of joke, it's like the opposite of OJ, like the glove fits perfectly and so I must remain here.
Right.
Like this is like clearly made for me, and I'm very blessed and fortunate to have the privilege to be here and to live here comfortably. From a business perspective, I would appreciate it if the tax situation was cleaned up a bit. I think it's a bit of a mess. I'm not loving some of our current political stuff that's going on, but I think it is still a phenomenal place to do business. We have a density and a diversity of industry, right? There's a running joke when I first moved to New York where people in California would say, oh, like you'd go to a party and it's like, oh, what do you do? I'm in tech. What do you do? I'm in tech. What do you do? I'm in tech.
Right.
And then you come to New York and it's like, what do you do? I'm in fintech. What do you do? I'm in health tech. What do you do? I'm in gov tech, right? So it's like
Right.
everyone's still in tech, but we're much closer, I think, to the realities of non-pure tech, right? Like we actually deal with mortgages here, right? We actually deal with healthcare here. We actually deal with, investing. We actually deal with biomedical research right across the water in Jersey. We have a huge diversity of industry. We have a huge diversity of knowledge. We have a huge diversity of education and lived experience and all of this. I think, I spent 22, something like that, years of my life living in California, 21 years. It is much more of a monoculture there. And that has pros, right? Where like everyone is at the bleeding edge, they're a few months ahead of us, etc. And I think that's, phenomenal if you are working on things that are truly bleeding edge. But, the majority of the problems today are, how does Bob share a spreadsheet with the team, right? Like, and these are like very basic things where there's a huge amount of productivity unlock available. There's a huge amount of revenue unlock, of cost savings unlock, et cetera, that are available to, massive organizations, right? Like if you think about, what is it, Mag 7 that they call it now, right? Like, sure. Like, I don't think any of them are headquartered here. And guess what? We have JPMC for now. Right? Like we have a huge amount of media. We have fashion. We have advertising. And while those industries are lagging behind tech overall, they are adopting and they are growing, and I think that they, can be very well served, and that there's a lot of money to be made here. And I also think that when hiring, the ability to say, hey, you're going to live in the greatest city in the world, versus saying, hey, you're going to live in a suburb of like Sunnyvale. Obviously different people want different things. And, that's wonderful that the world has enough space for both. But I love this spot, and I want to work with people that also love this spot. And, also tangential, but related, A, we are hiring, and B, my last company was 100% remote, and this one's not. We are doing in person. We work from coffee shops currently. We're hunting for an office, but the real goal, right, is to build this kind of New York-based, New York-focused, New York founded core team, and really start by serving kind of that New York customer segment.
Yeah, no, I love to hear it. I mean, I have a lot of similar sentiments about New York City. I grew up in New Jersey and then came to New York for college, and then I've kind of been back and forth since. So, and speaking of hiring, we can talk later about that. But there's a lot of people in my Hudson River network community that are probably good AI engineers and stuff like that. So we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned all the niches within New York City. I mean, I think that's going to be incredibly important with AI. I mean, now it seems that the important thing is to have like niche information in highly specialized areas that you can train AI to do those things, right? And so that's where the pockets of value are. And so having all those industries here in New York, I mean, you're much closer to that. So I think that'll be pretty valuable for anyone trying to, create smarter AIs in a certain domain.
Yep, absolutely.
What's like the biggest challenge that you face that someone else who's going through it right now can look to another example, someone who's come out the other side and realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel?
It's not the biggest one, but I think it's an important one, which is understanding that there's cyclicality in life. And if you're going through a shitty period, it is important to sit down and look back and understand, like, A, is it actually bad? Like, or are you being like a little bit of a drama queen, right? And B, what is the cyclicality of that in your life? And I was very fortunate in my last company where at some point I figured out that for me, and I don't know why, I can't explain it, but it's roughly every 3 months. I'll have a great 3 months, have a terrible 3 months, right? Always happens.
Yeah.
I'm currently in the down slump, right? But I know that, like, I'm a few months out, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
And that's really powerful, right? Because when you're on top of the world and then everything falls out, right? Because it always does, something goes wrong, you can be emotionally prepared. You're like, I knew it was gonna happen. It's fine, chill. Just get down and, like, keep working. Because I know that when it's down, I've only got to look forward a few months and everything's gonna be fine, right? And so it gives you a lot of, it kind of gives yourself permission to accept the negatives that come and happen, and to let go kind of the highs, right? Because, like, you can be like, everything's amazing, and then, like, try and grasp onto that, and, like, you just gotta let it go. Like, it's okay. Like, you will be back here,
Right.
and it's a very powerful thing when you can understand what that cycle is, and understand, like, what, you can obviously impact it, right? It's not like it's ordained, or maybe it is, I don't know. But I believe, you have some control over it. And so, in terms of managing your own experiences, having that understanding of what's going on and setting expectations is powerful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, knowing that, allows you to, when you're in the low point, realize that, it's not going to last forever, and it's not a bottomless pit. So that sort of gets rid of that fear that it could go on, indefinitely. And it reminds me of, I'm reading a book right now by Ray Dalio, the famous, I guess, Bridgewater hedge fund founder, and it's all about the cycles of, this is more focused on the world debt cycle and international order, but we were talking about companies as states, so maybe that makes sense too. But yeah, it's everything cycles, but there are clear things that you can do to prolong the high points and then shorten the low points. And empires or countries throughout time that did that, definitely saw much longer times of prosperity. So I'm sure that the same is true on a lower level for a single person. So definitely something there. And then last up, do you have some valuable insight that you'd leave an entrepreneur with that'll save them maybe a year, 5 years of their life, or some big pitfall they can avoid?
Don't build anything until you have a paying customer.
Agreed. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Boris, and I look forward to seeing where your AI goes, how it develops as you go through this customer discovery cycle and product discovery cycle. And yeah, it'll be cool to see how it impacts companies.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Brendan.
Yep. All right. Take care.